So Daniel Marins, as far as the sequester, what do you see happening? What would you like to see happen?
Well, David, I mean, there's no question that these kinds of drastic, immediate cuts would be damaging to the economy. But the idea of $500 billion from defense over the course of 10 years, that amounts to something like a 7% cut. And as experts like Larry Korb at the Center for American Progress have noted, that's actually an extremely modest reduction in defense spending. If we're trying to actually make room in our budget to provide basic social insurance for our aging population, then we want to do things like reduce our defense spending, particularly our unnecessarily large Cold War style military defense spending. And so if we were to do that sort of with a scalpel in a smart way over time, $500 billion would be actually a relatively modest number, and we want to go higher than that. And so I think it's actually a shame that we're being forced to jettison that size of a cut just because it is so immediate. And given the strength of the defense lobby, particularly in the Republican caucus, but really in the Democratic caucus as well, we're not going to see defense cuts of that size. Now, progressives like myself who do work in the advocacy field advocating against cuts in Social Security and Medicare benefits are concerned. We're concerned that this mix of spending cuts and tax increases that would be passed to offset an undoing of the sequester would include major changes to Social Security that would be far more devastating to people living on fixed incomes than drastic defense cuts, no matter how awkward or drastic. We're very concerned about that. And in fact, frankly, I think if the president had his druthers, it would happen. I mean, it looked for a time like the Republicans had taken the government shutdown off the table. We could really theoretically have done with relative political ease, undoing the sequester without any offsets, and everyone would get to move on to their favorite topic of economic growth and away from austerity. Unfortunately, the president really, really wants a sort of political grand bargain. And what we saw is a willingness to, I think, also make a political miscalculation. On Monday, it was a speech in Minneapolis about gun safety. And then he very, very quickly shifted the narrative in the press to one about the sequester with that Tuesday press conference. That was a decision on the part of the president. That was a decision that this is such a tremendous political priority for him that he was basically willing to unearth it from the dead and bring it back and make the grand bargain a priority again. And he literally said, the deal that I offered John Boehner time and time again, which we know included at least at some point an increase in the Medicare eligibility age, and the significant cuts to Social Security, that is the chain consumer price index, the chain CPI, is back on the table. That's very disconcerting. Where would it stop? Who would stop it if that were a deal that many liberals and many people in the president's base, frankly, many Americans from all partisan stripes find objectionable? It would be stopped by Democrats in the Senate. Mm-hmm. That's where we need to continue to look. Greg Sargent of the Washington Post in his blog, The Plumb Line, reported sort of breaking Friday afternoon that Harry Reid and a number of Democratic senators, particularly sort of from the progressive wing of the Democratic caucus, including Sherrod Brown, have come to an agreement that they will put forth a mix of tax increases and spending cuts to offset the sequester that will not include Social Security cuts. Again, that will not include Social Security cuts, and that will only include Medicare cuts on the provider side, not Medicare cuts that shift costs onto beneficiaries. That's something that progressives can approve of. That's something that really Americans that are concerned about their financial security and the future of our social insurance programs don't think we need to be, at the very least, making these decisions sort of at the barrel of a gun with the threat of an economic shutdown as our impetus. Should be very happy about. Yeah. But frankly, that will not pass unless we get behind that plan and that Senate plan and prevent the White House from what I think the White House's preferred plan is, which is a grand bargain that cuts these programs.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's not just a good policy, I would argue, it's also good politics, because if the Democrats can get out there saying, okay, look, here's our plan, and for whatever reason Republicans decide to reject it, or House Republicans say they'll never even bring it up, then clearly Republicans' own responsibility for the sequester moving forward, especially if the plan seems like it's reasonable, which I think I think Harry Reid and Sherrod Brown would strongly argue this is a much more reasonable plan than even the one the president put forward last fall. And keep in mind, folks, one of the reasons, as Danny Marins pointed out, the shift in focus from guns to the sequester, and we've been talking a lot about guns the last couple of weeks, the calculation has been done at the White House that if, in fact, the economy goes back into the ditch, then everything the president's trying to work on, and whether it's immigration or whether it's gun control, everything else starts to become in jeopardy. That if there's an economic crisis again, the president's agenda gets hurt. And that's why I think you suddenly see the White House making a pretty sharp move towards talking about the sequester, towards building up the Democratic argument on that.